Tales of the Wild Northwest. So Augustus was going to Gaul. He made the announcement one afternoon to his family and friends reclining at dinner. To the children, seated as usual at a nearby table, going to Gaul meant excitement and adventure. "Going to Gaul!" exclaimed 10-year-old Drusus in an excited whisper to his brother Tiberius. Their stepfather was going to Gaul. Just that morning Drusus had been reading Julius Caesar's War in Gaul, and had imagined himself with Caesar fighting the wild tribes and conquering the country. Many centuries later, American boys would be reading with the same thrill of pioneers and fighters on what would then become the frontier of civilization. For Gaul was the Wild West to the Romans, as far as their civilization had. Beyond the Rhine, which marked the border of Gaul, there were no permanent towns, but deep, dark forest through which roamed wandering tribes of warlike Germans. These people dressed in skins, lived by hunting and fishing, raising only occasional fields of corn around their temporary villages. Across the water to the north of Gaul was the almost unknown island of the Britons, people no less primitive than the Germans. And beyond that, what? No one knew. Drusus turned again to his brother. How far was their stepfather going into Gaul, did Tiberius think? Up into Germany and over to Britain, like Julius Caesar had done? Tiberius did not answer. He wanted to hear what else Augustus was saying about his plans. Motioning Drusus to be quiet, Tiberius leaned forward to listen, a deep frown between his large, near-sighted eyes, and his mouth half open, which unfortunately made him look less intelligent. Actually, this solemn, silent, sandy-haired boy, who was to become Rome's second emperor, was extremely intelligent, and so unusually level-headed for a boy of 14 that his schoolmates often called him the old man. For the past 5 years, since the death of their own father, the two brothers, Tiberius and Drusus, had been living with their stepfather Augustus in his home on the Palatine. They were under the ever-watchful eye of Livia, who was a most ambitious mother, constantly on the alert to promote the future of her sons. Livia was watching Tiberius now, as he sat listening to the conversation between Augustus and Agrippa. The two men were talking about the walled towns of Gaul and the need of repairing the muddy trails connecting them by well-paved Roman roads. Livia was pleased to see how absorbed Tiberius was, but wished he would sit up straight and not squint so much, comparing him, as she always did, to Marcellus, Octavia's handsome son, who always appeared to have a better advantage. Forever charming and agreeable, Marcellus was too great a favorite with his uncle Augustus to please Livia. Augustus looked upon him, she feared, as a future husband for his own 12-year-old daughter, Julia, who was now sitting between Marcellus and Tiberius. Young Julia, spoiled and saucy, with her curls piled up in a much too grown-up fashion, and her pretty full lips painted much too red, was trying to flirt with both of the boys at once. Unable to distract their attention from Agrippa, however, who was describing the mining towns of Gaul and the skillful metal workers, she was obliged to listen. But she showed no interest until Agrippa mentioned jewelry. Then Julia jumped up and ran to her father. Throwing her arms around his neck, she made him promise that he would bring her back necklaces and bracelets from Gaul before she would return to her place at the table. On the other side of Marcellus was his half-sister, Antonia, as gentle and sweet in manner as her mother Octavia. Beyond her were the twins, Cleopatra's attractive children, to whom Antonia, through their father Antony, was also a half-sister. The twins were being brought up by Augustus, as were also a couple of mysterious-eyed young Eastern princes. Subject kings of Asia Minor had a habit of sending their sons to Rome, either as hostages or to keep them from being murdered by their jealous relatives. They completed the circle at the children's table and brought Livia's eyes back to her own sons, Drusus and Tiberius. Tiberius continued to listen to the adults. The rest of the young group began comparing notes as to what they themselves already knew or had heard about the Gauls. All of them had seen Gauls from the backwoods, wandering about the forum, dressed in their scarlet or plaid cloaks, in long, peculiar trousers. Several had seen tall, blond Germans dressed in wolf skins, staring up at the strange buildings, but none of them had ever seen a Briton. It was believed that few Britons, if any, had ever come to Rome. And yet, tin comes to Rome from Britain all the time, remarked Tiberius unexpectedly. He found it interesting to think how many things like tin traveled from place to place, tying strange far-off countries and unknown people together. Wheat came from Egypt, purple dye from Syria, spices from India, tin from Britain. He might have told the others how tin was brought on pack horses and by barges down the rivers, but he didn't. The others, he saw, were more interested in the fact that Britons fought in chariots and painted themselves blue. They used some kind of plant called woad, said Drusus. Julius Caesar wrote about it, and he said they looked terrible in a fight. Drusus was very much disappointed to find that Augustus did not intend to go to Britain or into Germany as Julius Caesar had done, or even far enough up into Gaul to see chieftains who still wore helmets decorated with the horns of animals. Augustus was merely going to sail across to Marseille or Narbo, which were perfectly civilized cities where people lived and dressed just as they did in Rome. The important chiefs of Gaul were going to meet him there. Augustus was going to divide Gaul into 4 parts instead of 3, have the people counted, open schools to teach them to speak Latin, and set up Roman law courts. But what excitement was there in that? Dull, humdrum business, it seemed to Drusus, compared to conquering a country the way Julius Caesar had done, and exploring unknown islands, and fighting the barbarians across the Rhine. Caesar had been almost shipwrecked on the coast of Britain, but just the same he had gone into the river called the Thames, and he had found that there were Druid priests there too, just as there were in Gaul. Before that he had crossed the Rhine to terrify the Germans. It was to help the Gauls drive out a tribe of Germans who had crossed into their territory that Caesar had first gone to Gaul. That's what I'll do when I grow up, thought Drusus. I'll go up into Gaul, and if those wild Germans ever come over the Rhine again, I'll go over into their country and keep on going as far as I can and conquer it the way Julius Caesar did in Gaul. Only part of Drusus's wish was to be fulfilled. The Germans were never to be conquered and brought under the rule of Rome. Yet while he was young, Drusus was to lead many expeditions through the swamps and into the dark forest of Germany, and for his daring and bravery he would be given the honorary title of Germanicus. But that was all still far in the future. Now it was not 10-year-old Drusus, but his stepfather Augustus, who was going to Gaul.